I shall make a start, I think, and then we can make the most of our time. So, welcome everybody. Welcome. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. This is the third and final webinar in this SMEP learning series. SMEP is the Sustainable Manufacturing and Environmental Pollution Programme. It's funded by the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and delivered in partnership with UNCTAD, SouthSouthNorth and Pegasus International. UNCTAD is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and its role is particularly relevant today because plastic substitution is not only an environmental issue, it's also very much about trade, markets, standards, industrial policy, and the development of more sustainable manufacturing systems. Okay, so my name is Zoe Lenkiewicz. I'm the founder and director of Global Waste Lab, and I was also the lead author of the United Nations Global Waste Management Outlook. Now, as SMEP approaches its conclusion in October 2026, this webinar series is helping to capture practical learning from the programme, not as polished success stories, but as honest reflections on what works, what doesn't, and what practitioners might do differently. So in the first webinar, we looked at viability. What makes plastics recovery models financially and operationally sustainable in constrained environments? In the second webinar, we looked at traceability, standards and regulatory alignment and how these can build confidence in recycled materials, support better regulation and create value from data when they are practical and context specific. So both of those webinars are available on YouTube. If you search for the SMEP program, you should find them there. And also, we've been sharing them in the LinkedIn discussions that we've been having. So thank you to everybody who has been taking part in those discussions on LinkedIn. If you've got comments that you'd like to add, anything you'd like to contribute to this program, please do join, add your comments under any of those posts that I've been creating or any of our speakers today, and of course the wonderful team at SouthSouthNorth as well. Right, today we are moving further upstream to look at plastic substitutes, material standards, policy pathways and regional alignment. For me, the big question today is what makes plastic substitution viable, credible, and scalable? Substitutes and alternatives can clearly play a role in reducing unnecessary single-use plastics, but they only work if they're suitable for the context, backed by credible standards, supported by realistic policy, and connected to markets and waste systems that can actually handle them. So today, we're bringing together different perspectives on that question, from FreshPPact, from the East African Community Single-Use Plastics Bill, from regional trade and green industrialisation work, and from UNCTAD's wider work on standards and regional governance. Today's very interesting session will include some short inputs and slides, but the main aim, as with the other ones, is discussion. We want to draw out the practical learning, the trade-offs and questions that matter for the briefing note and final synthesis report that are going to be generated from these webinars. So please do use the Q&A box throughout. You should be able to see it at the top of your screen if you're on a desktop. I think if you're on a mobile phone, it's probably near the bottom. And please also complete the feedback form when it's shared. So Stacey and Alexa, thank you ever so much for all the work that you've been doing in the background to make sure that everything runs smoothly. As ever, you've been fantastic. And at a few points during the webinar, Stacey is going to be sharing the feedback form link in the comments section. So please look out for that and please do share your comments with us. Right, the learning from this session will feed into a short briefing note and the whole series will conclude with a synthesis report. So your input really does matter. We want the final outputs to reflect not only what our wonderful speakers are saying, but where the sector is now, including your questions, concerns, and your practical experience. So thank you once again for joining us. It really does make a lot of difference to have such experienced people in the audience as well as on our panel. Now I'm going to introduce the format for today and our speakers. And today, excuse me, we're going to be starting slightly differently. because Ebenezer Laryea from FreshPact, excuse me, put my teeth back in, from FreshPact is unfortunately unable to join us live, but he has very kindly sent a recorded contribution. So we'll play that near the start of the session to bring in the FreshPact perspective on plastic alternatives, fresh produce value chains, and what it takes for substitutes to move beyond pilots. We'll then move into the live discussion. We are joined by Faith Macharia from the Africa Legal Network, who will bring insights from the East African Community Single-Use Plastics Bill, particularly from the legal and implementation slides. So welcome, Faith. Thank you very much for being here. And we're also joined by Carlotta del Lago, who will help us understand why a regional approach was needed in East Africa and how the bill became part of a wider conversation about green industrialization, trade, and regional policy alignment. And finally, we have Henrique Pacini from UNCTAD, who will help connect the discussion to these wider questions of trade, standards, regional governance, and plastic substitution pathways, including the upcoming UNCTAD session on West African plastics governance on the 4th of June. So very much looking forward to hearing about that. Thank you for being here, Henrique. All right, so that is my introduction done. I'm going to just, before playing the video from Ebenezer, I am going to just show you very briefly his headshot so that you can put a face to the voice that you're going to be hearing. Okay, so this is Ebenezer. As I said, unfortunately, he's unable to join us live. He may make it right at the end, so fingers crossed. But for now, I'm going to ask Stacey to kindly share Ebenezer's video with the sound, please, Stacey. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. Please do just let me know if there's an issue with the sound. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Ebenezer. I'm the project director for the FreshPact project. My sincere apologies that I could not be with you in person this morning. This is due to unforeseen circumstances that cropped up at the very last moment, making it extremely difficult for me to be with you in person. Nevertheless, I hope to join at the latter parts of the session when the discussion is ongoing. I will be delivering a very short presentation via this recording titled Transitioning from Single-Use Plastics, the Story of Ghana's Policy Blueprint for Plastic Alternatives. And in this presentation, I will be sharing the story of work that we've done on our project in relation to advancing plastic alternatives in Ghana. So like many countries in the global south, Ghana has an acute problem when it comes to plastic pollution. Ghana imports about 2.58 million metric tons of raw plastics annually. 73% of that ends up as waste. And out of all of the waste that is collected, about 9.5% is actually so, for our project, we set the task of trying to help address this problem by developing innovative solutions that could help mitigate plastic pollution in Ghana, specifically in the fresh produce supply and value chains. In order to achieve this, we targeted 3 key sources of pollution. Number 1 was plastic agricultural mulch, which is a material used in pineapple farming in Ghana, plastic packaging, and plastic workwear. And of course, our project delivered significant success by good grace of God in developing solutions such as the coconut coir mulch material, which we trialed successfully as an alternative substitute to plastic agricultural mulch. However, in delivering these innovations and developing these solutions, we realized a critical gap, which is that in Ghana, like in many other countries on the continent, there is no lack of innovative solutions, particularly when it comes to plastics. However, the gap that we identified was that the policy structures were not sufficient enough to allow those solutions to take off. So if you think of the innovative solutions, plastic alternatives specifically, if you think of them as babies, right? Babies need a supporting environment, right? For example, a baby needs milk. So you feed a baby milk for a number of months, and then before you know it, the baby will start growing teeth. And then you can begin to feed it solid food. And as you feed it solid food, before you know it, the baby will start crawling, the bones will start enlarging, they'll start growing, and before you know it, they can walk, and before you know it, they can run. So the question that we have, or the question that we need to answer, is how do we get these innovative solutions to run? And the answer to that question is that we've got to strengthen the incubator, because at the moment the incubator is not working as well as it should, and the incubator being the policy structure. So as a result of that, we set ourselves the task of developing a policy blueprint for Ghana, which is a first on the African continent, working in partnership with stakeholders in Ghana and the government of Ghana, to have a framework and a roadmap through this blueprint by which Ghana could establish a thriving plastic alternatives industry, and by doing so, transition away from single-use plastics. The policy blueprint is made up of 6 pillars, each with their corresponding policy goals and actions. So pillar 1 is about strengthening stakeholder networks. Of course, this is about joining the dots, bringing different policy stakeholders, I beg your pardon, together to mobilize towards the shared purpose of transitioning away from single-use plastics by developing the plastic alternatives industry. The second pillar is around creating economic incentives, which is very, very crucial and extremely important because plastic alternatives are at the moment very expensive. Plastics are cheaper comparatively because over the last 50 years we've figured out how to make them better, how to reduce the input costs. We've optimized the production of them, and so they are cheaper, they are convenient, and therefore they are very, very attractive. And plastic alternatives need to go on that same journey as well. So we need the economic incentives to support local producers and attract investment to scale quickly. And of course, that's what the second pillar is about, and that's a major thing. The third pillar is around regulatory standards and phase bans, and that is about ensuring not only that plastic alternatives are safe as a product for consumers, suitable for business, and suitable for the general public as a whole, but also that they are export ready, and that we can begin to trade plastic alternatives with each other rather than trading conventional single-use plastic products, and use trade as a vehicle to reduce plastic pollution across the globe. And across continents. The fourth pillar is on boosting public awareness. It's about education to drive behavioral change. And the key thing here is not just about raising and actioning public awareness campaigns on social media, TV, radio, etc. But it is also about a generational shift. So embedding knowledge on plastic alternatives into the school curricula, teaching children at a very young age about the importance of transitioning to plastic alternatives for the purpose of the environment, for the purpose of society and economic growth. But it is also about helping them to understand the dangers that plastic pollution poses, to the environment. The fifth pillar is R&D, which is also extremely important. It's about encouraging local innovation, going further and faster in our research and development to figure out how to better optimize plastic alternatives, thereby making them cheaper. This is the same journey that plastics themselves have been on over the last 50 years. If you track back, to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, plastics were a lot more expensive than they are now, but over a period of time, you've had a lot of R&D, We figured out how to make them cheaper, how to make them better, how to make them more attractive to consumers because of the lower cost and the convenience. And we need to do the same thing with plastic alternatives. So the R&D bit is important. And then finally, monitoring and compliance. We have this framework, this blueprint in Ghana. The monitoring and compliance pillar is about how we ensure that we're keeping track of progress, but we are collecting data in addition to that, to feed back into the corrective actions that need to be taken to implement this policy blueprint successfully. This is my final slide. So finally, this is a systems map which illustrates how all 6 pillars work together as an integrated policy ecosystem rather than them being sort of isolated initiatives. So on the left, you've got 3 input streams, which are the stakeholder networks providing collaborative foundation, economic incentives in the form of obviously tax breaks, subsidies, grants, etc., and the regulatory standards, which include bans on single-use plastics, compliance schemes, etc. Now, these feed into the 2 transformation processes at the center, the R&D, which drives material innovation, testing, piloting, and the public awareness campaigns in enabling a generational shift in behavioral change at the community level and the national level as well, driving forward the national ethos around plastic alternatives. And these, the outputs on the right are twofold, right? So what we get from the inputs and the transformation in the form of the outputs is the monitoring and compliance, ensuring regulatory enforcement, and a sustainable plastics alternatives industry, which is generating green jobs, helping to improve environmental conditions and fueling economic growth at the same time. Critically, there's a feedback loop which is shown at the bottom, which shows how the results that are being monitored continuously inform stakeholder priorities and the adjustment of incentives, etc., creating an adaptive self-improving system that learns and evolves over time and responds and adjusts to different pressures that may emerge during the implementation phase. So this is a journey that Ghana is on. It's an exciting journey, and we hope it presents a model that can be replicated elsewhere. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar, and I look forward to joining the conversation later on. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Ebenezer, in your absence. That was a very helpful and informative presentation. What I really liked about that was how it talked about moving from just individual products or pilots, as Ebenezer described as these babies that need the support around them, up into a wider policy and the market framework. And I would really encourage you to explore more about the work delivered under the FreshPPact project through the materials they've published and shared online, and also to link in with Dr. Ebenezer Laryea, who we were just listening to, because I'm sure that he is more than happy to engage in further discussion, especially if he's not able to join us at the end of this session. So look, we're going to come back to some of those points later, especially with Henrique around policy standards and regional governance. But next up, I would like to welcome Faith Macharia from the African Legal Network. Good morning, Faith. Thank you so much for joining us. Please do go ahead, share your slides, introduce yourself, and share your insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Thank you for having me. Good morning, good afternoon from the sunny Nairobi. So I'll just take 1 minute to just share my slides.
If you'd like, Faith, I can also share them from this end. It's up to you.
Yeah. Let me just 1 moment. Let me just see.
Super. Yep, lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, so I think you just share from your side. This is actually not the right one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, please.
Mm-hmm. Is this the right one?
Yeah.
Excellent.
So thank you so much. Yeah, so thank you so much. I'll just dive into the main content because of the time allocation. And I think it would be remiss of me first not to acknowledge the team that has participated in drafting the East Africa Single-Use Plastic Prohibition Bill 2026 now. That's the latest version that we have. So maybe perhaps you can go to the slide that has the team from the ALN team. And also it is also be important for me to acknowledge an important partner in this journey that we worked together with to develop this bill. And this is FreshPPact project. So the East Africa Single-Use Plastic, it's a collaboration between ALN Kenya and the FreshPPact project. So I'll just go to this main slide. That's being the first slide, Zoe. Sorry, we have to keep on doing this. And that is the slide that we have the different countries showing the different regulatory impact. So quickly can just move on to the fourth slide. Zoe, that's again, sorry, just go to the fourth slide. That one. Thank you so much. So as you can see from the slide, this captures the current plastics regulatory reality within the East Africa community. We have one region market operating under multiple national legal systems in terms of laws regulating the plastics in this region. So over the years, we have seen individual partner states that have taken, important, and in some instances, to be honest, what I can say, pioneering, national measures. So for example, we saw Rwanda banned plastic bags as early as 2008. Then it was followed by Kenya in 2017, and other countries have already, done so. So those were significant national interventions, and they demonstrated strong political commitment to addressing plastic pollution in the country. However, despite the different countries having their laws on the ban of plastics, plastic manufacturing, the packaging supply flows, talk about the trade flows, the West movement, basically, they're inherently regional in nature. And the practical reality on the ground within the ESC is that a fragmented regulatory landscape, has created, we have seen enforcement gaps in enforcement. We have seen, uneven transition periods, timelines within the member states. We've seen inconsistent standards among the member states and opportunities for regulatory, arbitrage. So that what you're seeing on the ground is you're seeing different licensing requirements. We're seeing different, variants, compliance standards. Some are more stricter than others. We're seeing different enforcement, approaches, and also different regulatory obligations. And obviously, this has had an impact to businesses operating within the region, so that it has created, uncertainty and inefficiency in some cases, so that a product is permitted in one jurisdiction and perhaps, prohibited in another. We've seen, manufacturers, the importers across the region, they have been forced to navigate multiple approval systems, different compliance obligations across the market. And you can see the impact to businesses operating in this region. So you're talking about higher compliance cost. We're talking about barriers to regional trade, slower development of regional recycling value chains, and etc. So the point I'm trying to make here is not that the national measures have failed totally, but rather that national action alone has not been fully able to address what is ultimately a cross-border environment and economic challenge in ESC. And this is the specific gap that the ESC single-use plastic bill seeks to address, so that the bill intends to move, the region from the fragmented national approaches that we currently have to one that supports, environment protection at a regional level. So the next slide, please. And I think Zoe, we can move to the next slide. And I think it will be remiss of me not to mention this as well. And this is actually the context in which we need to understand, the ESC, in the context of the ongoing, plastic treaty negotiations under the UNCTAD process. And if there's a learning that we can take from the global process is that, plastic pollution cannot be, effectively addressed through isolated national measures. I think that's actually the message that you're getting from the global, plastic treaty discussions. And therefore, we are moving towards a coordinated life cycle governance, covering production, design, consumption, etc. And the proposed EAC bill reflects the same policy, direction, but at a regional level. And the difference is that the Global Plastic Treaty is going to establish an emerging global, framework with broad international obligations, while the EAC bill is designed as a regional implementation mechanism tailored to the realities, to the ground, to our unique circumstances at the East Africa Community Market. So in practical terms, what the EAC bill attempts to do is to answer some questions that we've seen they're not in the global treaty. For example, how do partner states coordinate enforcement? How do we manage in EAC transboundary movement of plastics? How do we harmonize standards across, the EAC? How do we create, aligned transition pathways for industry and consumers in EAC? These are some of the things that have not been addressed in the current, draft treaty that we have at the global level. So therefore, we are seeing this bill, complementing, what is being done at the global level rather than competing it. And in many respects, in my view, it positions the EAC ahead of the curve, by attempting to create coordinated regional governance architecture before the treaty framework is fully, concluded. And jumping into the next slide, So, and what you're just seeing in EAC, it's not just, the problem is not just plastics. It's also, fragmented transition pathways, different countries transitioning at different speeds, using different standards, I've said, using different definitions, using different enforcement models. I just gave an example, the Rwanda, and in 2008, Kenya, in 2017, and other countries have followed, but we still have the problem, the single-use plastics within the EAC. And then both what, as I said, all these national laws, they were significant national environmental interventions. However, what we've actually learned over time, or what this actually illustrates, is that the challenge of managing environmental transitions within a shared regional market like EAC, where countries move at different, regulatory speeds and under different, standards, is that it actually poses a challenge, and there's a need perhaps to think, regional policy or a regional level, just that the way you have advanced in the EAC bill, so that the regional policy pathways, they're not about eliminating national sovereignty. I think that's actually a concern about, that came up during the process, or imposing identical regulatory models. Now, it's actually about, creating coherence across markets to reduce fragmentation, to reduce mixed signals, to reduce regulatory uncertainty, especially for trade. And with this background, I just want to give you a quite high level, silent features of the single-use plastic bills without going to the details of it. So maybe you can quickly go to the next one. Thank you, Zoe. And as I said, the bill was developed within the context of increasing recognition that plastic pollution, talk about the trade flows, the packaging system, the waste management challenges, they're inherently, regional, if you like, in this context, or transboundaries. And at a high level, what the bill then does, proposes a first regional approach, to prohibition, to control, to regulation of certain single-use plastics across the EAC partner states, so that importantly, the bill does not approach transition purely through bans. No, it also attempts to address the broader implementation ecosystem around single-use plastics governance. So, for example, the bill, introduces extended producer responsibility obligations, which basically means the manufacturers, the importers of these single-use plastics, they're obligated to participate in the collection, in the take back, in the recycling, and in the waste management systems. And this just reflects a broader shift from the linear consumption, model towards a polluter pays and a circular economy approach. And this is actually what you're also seeing from the global, approach. Another thing is that the bill recognizes that transition cannot happen overnight because of the unique, cultural, economic, and other political situation that we have in ESC. And we therefore proposes a transition period, intended to allow, the states, the businesses, the manufacturers time to adapt to the proposed regulatory changes. And the proposal is that to have fully elimination of the single-use plastics within 3 years of commencement of the bill. Another important aspect of the bill is that it acknowledges the practical realities of implementation by providing, strategic exemptions for the time being, where maybe alternatives may not yet be feasible, or maybe feasible but maybe out of reach to the population in this side. And that includes things like medical, medicine purposes, for scientific purposes, and etc. And then and finally, just on this point, is that it creates a space for discussion, the bill, around regional waste systems, recycling infrastructure, alternative markets, etc. And more broadly, as I conclude, is that the bill lies not only in restriction it proposes, but it attempts to create an aligned regional pathways around standards, around enforcement, around etc. But I must also, as I go to the next slide, I must also, mention that it has not been an easy journey. It has been a challenging journey, and I think it may be helpful for us to share the challenges or the lessons that we have learned from the regional processes and global plastics. As I said, this is a joint effort between ALN and Flip-Floppy Project, and ALN has been, involved in presentations before the East Africa Legislative Assembly. Every month we are appearing before the relevant committee, at least once, just to make the presentation in a legal, in a trade way, in a political way that then relates to our members of parliament in this sense. And then so the real complexity, in my view, the challenge is not simply, identify the plastic problems, which you've already done, but the real complexity lies in designing the transition pathways that are regionally coordinated, economically realistic, and practically, implementable. And then what we've also seen, of course, that has played, a role maybe at times, delays, at times we've had to do a lot in that respect, is different national priorities. Of course, you're talking about now 9 ESC member states. You can imagine they have different national priorities. They have different, regulatory speeds. And this has created tensions around, timelines for the bill. Is it the right time, for example? It has created tensions around, implementation readiness. It has created, tensions around the pace of transition. The truth of the matter, this is a political process as good as it is a legal process. The other lesson, or the other challenge that we've encountered, is balancing environmental goals with economic realities. And one of the most significant challenges globally, so this is not just unique in ESC, has been balancing, environmental protection, industrial development, trade competitiveness, and etc. And also, I think this actually a very good point to mention is that during these discussions and during the process of coming up with the bill, it has also highlighted the importance of ensuring that transition frameworks do not exclude informal waste workers, so that it's inclusive, because we know across Africa, waste pickers, and especially in East Africa and especially in Kenya, is that waste pickers remain central to collection, to sorting, recycling, and they play a very big role in this circular economy system. And as I finalize, is that what we've also encountered is the global political divisions that have been, reflected regionally, so that many of the tensions that have seen visible in the global plastic treaty negotiations, they've emerged regionally, and they have expressed different views on production limits, for example. They have, different, views about financial responsibilities, who is responsible, different views about transition timelines. Is 3 years sufficient, or should be going for a longer period about that? But perhaps the most important lesson I think that we have taken from this process is that the hardest question is no longer whether regional coordination is necessary. I think the ESC as a bloc, we have moved beyond that. We have aligned, we are speaking on the same mind that regional coordination is necessary. But now the most difficult question that we have to face as ESA, it is how to design, how to sequence implementation across partner states operating from different legal, economic, infrastructural starting points. And also, as I finalize, the bill is still before the relevant committee of the East African Legislative Assembly, and with an expected voting date of November this year. And you're hopefully that by the time you're crossing next year, we'll have an East Africa Single-Use Plastic Act. Thank you so much, Zoe. I appreciate.
Thank you very much, Faith. Wow, it's so impressive, the East Africa Single-Use Plastics Bill. I've been sort of following it over the last few years, and also had the privilege of working a little bit with the Flip Floppy project, and just to let people know, in our audience, the Dipesh is here. He's got his hand up. Hey, Dipesh, morning. I don't know if we are able to actually turn you on at all, turn your mic on, but please do add comments in the chat there, Dipesh. Yeah, there's a Flip Floppy toolkit, and part of which is online for anybody to see. Oh, hi, Dipesh. Oh, that's right. It was a mistake. Well, nice to see that you're here anyway. Yeah, the Flip Floppy toolkit includes sections on how to influence policy, how to help guide standards and that kind of thing. So it's really well worth taking a look at. And thank you once again, Faith, for your contribution there. It's really interesting, and there's so much that we can unpack. I think we are getting a little bit pushed for time, so I'm going to come back to the discussion later on, if that's okay with you, and pass next straight to Carlotta, please. Hi, Carlotta, how are you? Thank you for joining us.
Hi,
I believe would you like to just go ahead for the sake of time, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you everyone for attending this interesting webinar and conversation. I'm Carlotta Dal Lago, and I lead business development, marketing and communication for ALN, the leading law firm in Africa. We are in 16 countries. And I'm saying this because I see a lot of potential to grow plastic across the continent and not just limit ourselves to East Africa. I think what was importantly laid out by Faith was the architecture of what the bill does, but also what the implementation requires. I would like to just add one layer to the story, which is how the instrument came to exist. Because I think this story could directly impact the other region, other countries, and can be easily transferable to anyone in this room who is trying to build similar framework elsewhere, and share what is the experience and the support. I hope, let me just put in presentation so it's easier and probably bigger for everyone to see. So what I've seen from the experience, and I've started to work on the bill almost in 2020, when I first joined ALN and I discovered the draft bill and the collaboration with the Flip Floppy project, is that I started to work, and what was happening is that it was very hard to be pushed further, not from a civil society perspective or from other organizations, but it was really getting a lot of obstacles to go through. So pollution kept coming because obviously, as Faith and the Flip Floppy always say, plastic doesn't stop at the border, but also the legislative attempt at the East African level in 2011, 2016 got stalled. And I think what we managed to understand, that they got stalled not because the law was wrong, but because the political and commercial conditions were not built. which is when we started to build this condition. So what changed is that what changed was not necessarily the legal drafting, but it was the creation of a shared diagnosis across the government, the civil society, and the private sector. And it was that a national approach was structurally insufficient, which is why we went to do it at the regional level. And the bill only became politically achievable when we changed what it was and the story behind it. We started presenting it as an environmental law, and it faced constant headwinds. Growth priority, industry resistance, sovereignty concern, etc., which I think we have seen it in many global negotiations as well. So when we reframe it as a green industrialization and trade policy instrument by anchoring it to what was becoming the major narrative of the Kenya government and the continental approach of the green industrialization, the East Africa Bill became a rule maker. The circular economy was not anymore a rule taker, but had the possibility to become an instrument that could change the way the politics was run and the narrative was run, which is when we really started to see a change in the approach and support from many actors. So for the trade minister, harmonized standard mean that ESC producer were becoming competitive in the EU and in global markets and not penalized by them. Where for the finance ministries, APR was creating an investment signal that could unlock private capital into recycling and alternative material infrastructure. For ministries of foreign affairs, the East African sub-bill was a sovereignty and positioning argument, a regional instrument that was able to let East Africa arrive at the Global Plastic Treaty negotiation, not just a recipient of rules written by somewhere else, but as a bloc that has already legislated, already aligned, and already led. And so this was very important. And for a lot of development partners, this became an industrial policy tool and not just a waste management program. And we were able to build a broader narrative and engage with actors that we were not able to engage before, such as UNCTAD or the WTO for the trade conversation, or substitute and alternative with the SMEP project, who, by the way, have been working with us since the very beginning. So thank you for that support as well. So, as I said, is what the new narrative has helped us to do was to create an ecosystem and to engage different stakeholders with a vision and a strategic plan in mind. Obviously all of this didn't happen in a vacuum. And we created the ecosystem starting with the civil society partnership, where we were building on flip-flopping public legitimacy and all the activity that they were doing with the super color boat across the region with the different, the different trip across the region. And engaging the right actor that could have pushed from civil society. We also started to build a coalition with the parliamentarian so that the legislators in Nairobi, Kampala, Dar es Salaam were all sharing the same position. We started to engage with the private sector so that manufacturers were working with us and not against us in helping drafting the bill more and more. And we are very grateful for all the work that a lot of organizations like Pepsi with their global team has put in supporting the draft of the bill. And legal and technical architecture that had to constantly be updated because opinions, APR design has constantly over the years have come to play a big role, which we had to adjust. So not a single of these elements was sufficient alone to push the bill. We really had to build the ecosystem through the year and engage with the right stakeholder. I don't think I will have the time in this presentation to thanks all the organization and person that have come to support, because they are really too many. So I think what the region can really offer is the story of what we had to build in terms of ecosystem and stakeholder, in terms of process. But I think anyone that wants to build on this, we are happy to collaborate. As I said, ALN is across 16 countries. We also have signed an MOU as government with the World Economic Forum, which also offers a very good platform for this kind of conversation. But I'm also the senior advisor of the PS of Foreign Affairs, and through his connection and diplomatic strategies, we are happy to take this and support other countries to learn from us, to share the bill, but also to learn from other experience like Ghana in alternative and substitute of plastic. Thanks a lot to everyone.
Thank you so much, Carlotta. Gosh, this is really, really interesting stuff. And what's really coming out for me is, you know, having been part of these discussions around the Global Plastics Treaty for the last few years, especially, you know, there's a lot of talk around the fact that we need to collaborate more across sectors. And you've actually been doing it. Yeah, you haven't just been talking about it. Literally everyone from the Flip Floppy project who are doing, you know, real community-based work, right through to manufacturers, to Pepsi, through to lawmakers across so many different countries. This is really genuinely collaboration in action. So really impressive, and so much that other regions and other countries can learn from the process that you have been through and continue to go through as you work to actually making this law. And what's also struck me is that really what's coming out a lot through this webinar so far is that, look, this isn't just about the environment, right? This is very much about trade, it's about industrial policy, and it's about regional development. And so I think that that's actually helping to elevate these issues and get it onto the tables of a lot more, you know, a much wider variety of stakeholder, actually getting their attention and getting their input and involvement. So huge congratulations. It is really exciting. And Henrique, I think that is the perfect moment for me to bring you in, please, because I know you have a lot to say on these matters. So over to you. Please go ahead and share your reflections.
Thanks, Carlotta, Faith, colleagues, and attendees. I am Henrique Pacini from UNCTAD. I also work as part of the SMEP program, which supports regionalism. We are trying to bring this lesson from East Africa to the West in cooperation with the World Economic Forum and with UNIDO. We are hosting an event on the 4th of June where we'll touch on three points. Those points are the points of my presentation. Plastics need to be made better, right? Controlling single-use plastics or plastics that are unnecessary, both through controls, restrictions, and also EPR. The standards of those materials need to be clear and solid, especially biodegradation, compostability standards. And finally, in some areas, you need to substitute, right? It only makes sense. You could regionalize jobs. You could increase the resilience of supply chains. That is very important, especially now in a context like Hormuz, where price of plastics shot up and the price of packaging is making food more expensive. So I'll share a few slides that I prepared is about the transition pathways, right? deviate slightly from the regionalism, but I'll get back there as the presentation flows. So the transitions, both in the energy systems and in the material systems, is nothing new, right? Let me just illustrate something I did here in 2011 about plastics, right? I was contacted by a journal, and they asked me to provide some feedback on how plastics and how the world around us changed around to become full of plastics. And it doesn't start in our lifetimes. 2,000 years ago, people were already deriving plastics from biomass, right? Especially from insects as coating materials, from bones, from tusks, and different types of polymers extracted from nature, right? But the problem is that once we had an industrial revolution propelled by coal, like new fossil fuels that allowed humankind in society to grow exponentially almost in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, you didn't have enough natural materials to meet that supply. So the search for alternative materials, at that time substitutes, was very strong and very driven by innovation. In the UK, the first bowling balls, pool balls, and films were created using Parkesine, so the first actual synthetic plastics. Music and the ability to record sounds in discs was also another application of that. But those were niche things, right? And they were dangerous, very flammable. But in the 20th century, then you had the big investments into the industrial capacity to produce plastics at scale. Look at this time. It's really like a short, late 19th century. Then phones, maybe some of you, I remember the phone in the house of my grandmother, it looked like that, and it was made of different plastics. That was the early days of mass utilization of plastics. Big investments went into the United States, in England, to scale the production of plastics, which were, let's say, turbocharged in World War II, especially for new innovations like coating of electronic wires for artillery, for radar systems. Polyethylene was developed around that time. And then, as we all know, it disseminated everywhere in society, from fashion to military uses. Here, where I am in Geneva, there's a Dupont Museum to the plastic bottle, which we see everywhere. But it's interesting that plastics came as a solution to a problem. They came as a material substitute. The problem of depletion of materials in nature, right? And now they became the problem again. So can we do another materials transition, right? And the answer is we can. We had the transition from the candle to the lamp bulb. By the way, candle light was cheaper than electric light from lamp bulbs in the late 19th century, early 20th century. The bioenergy systems in Brazil, that's a big case. Like making fuel for cars out of agriculture was seen as something impossible in the 70s. But still, the country, through a lot of public investments and policies favoring that, so there was government intervention, they managed to create a system where ethanol, they tried both ethanol, vegetable oil, and nuclear power, but ethanol especially became price competitive with gasoline. Solar photovoltaics. When I was starting my career in the early 2000s, solar photovoltaics was very expensive, not competitive at all. Today, I'll show you. At rise of craft paper, animal fiber, so changing from wool and leather to vegetable fiber, what we have in our clothes now, those were all massive scale material transitions. Look at this, the solar power. This is called a learning curve. So this looks at cumulative production through time. So in the 70s, solar power was $100 a watt. Like it could work for a spacecraft going to Mars, but never for homes and balconies. Look at today. This is 2019. It's even cheaper today, less than 50 cents per watt. So the learning curve of this technology over the last 30 years was immense. This is for ethanol. There's plenty of literature in all those technologies. And the more we produce something, the more we achieve scale, the lower the unit price gets. So can we reach price parity with plastics? And this is a funny picture, but when I lived in Boston, I remember this supermarket chain called Market Basket. They had two options for you once you did your groceries. You could get the free paper bag or the paid plastic bag. And that stuck to my mind. Like, how can they make paper free and plastic paid? meaning that back in their logistics supply chain, they could get probably a better price for paper bags than for plastics. So you can achieve scale and price parity in natural materials. You just need enough investments, right? And how do you accelerate the learning curve for non-plastic substitutes? Be it vegetable fibers, be it clay, be it glass. By the way, most of those technologies are existing technologies, and they were plentiful once upon a time. And rolled back in the 80s, everybody was drinking, even in the early 90s, soft drinks from glass bottles, and you had to have the reverse logistics. Plastics facilitated that, so you gotta kill the reverse logistics and you kill the heavy material, but you created the new problem of the downstream. So how do you advance that curve for the plastic substitutes, which we had back then, and we could retake them with the new dressing of technology and the digital economy and so on, and the new plastic substitutes that are emerging. It is possible. Some concrete examples here. Every vegetable fiber in the world can be used, right? This is pineapple being extracted in Kenya, just near Carlotta and Faith, in the outskirts of Nairobi. And if you have a capital injection in automation, you can derive at scale the textile fibers to substitute, for example, polyester from waste-based materials, such as pineapple fiber, right? And then export this. This commands a quite good price per kilogram, around $5 per kilogram. What does it take to take this scale of pineapple fiber today, a nascent alternative plastic industry, to the scale of sugarcane operations, which are 1,000 times larger, right? Meaning it is possible to get there. You need regulatory supports, ideally at the regional level and at a global level, and you need capital investments. Right? The same in other sectors. I don't know if Ebenezer is already connected, but he coordinated a project to substitute plastics in agriculture for vegetable matter, that we call so-called mulch films, and this is also possible. And thinking outside the box as well, different delivery channels, right? Because plastics not only is changing the plastics, for the non-plastics, and keeping the delivery pathway the same. You can deliver potable water in a plastic bottle, or you can deliver through a filter. Why don't we scale back the filter systems that we had back in the day that are cheap, and that would reduce the plastic intensity of water delivery or beverage delivery? Policy matters. We have to have enabling logistics and soft logistics, and I think soft logistics is what the colleagues Faith and Carlotta touched on. You need to have regional cooperation to allow the regions to act as large markets, to enable those innovations, especially substitution innovations, to gain more market traction than the national market alone. Ideally even broader, like continental or global, through the plastics treaty. You need substitution roadmaps to orchestrate the government policy action or the regional policy action with the investment action needed to scale, for example, the case of paper, to reach there. And do not forget that a lot of plastics go through trade, and a lot of substitutes also go through trade. 78% of plastics go through trade. And today in the world, we have a perverse situation where the tariffs are higher for non-plastic substitutes, ceramics, and especially natural fibers, than they are for plastics. Trading plastics is cheap. We need to act on the tariff schedules and also on the regulations that affect non-plastic substitutes to make their trade easier. Colleagues, no data, no policy. So we need to have everything we discuss, we need to have anchors in data. So at UNCTAD, we established a database of non-plastic substitutes spread in different areas, and natural fibers, mineral products, products that replace fishing gear. And we keep this database of trade. So you can look at the dynamics between countries. You can look at the dynamics in East Africa in the world, the dynamics in West Africa in the world. And that's very important to ground policy in actual data. The market is evolving very fast, and I'm very excited about that. Marine-based feedstock, we studied a bit this. Like seaweed will not compete for land and can be expanded. There's things that look like Star Trek or Star Wars, like PHAs, polyhydroxyalkanates, which are bacteria-based, fermentation-based plastics from the guts of bacteria that can be made from any agricultural feedstock, seaweed, or even CO2. Basically, you can get the chimneys of a waste burning factory and get that CO2, pass it through biological processes and make a type of bioplastics that degrades naturally. Of course, the unit price of this is high today, but can we get it lower? Absolutely, we can. Just need a coherent roadmap for investment and policy. So can we move towards a better material systems? Yes, I mean, if we move away from plastics to non-plastic substitutes, even the existing ones that we have here in the world trade, and because moving away from plastic is not only moving away from the product, it's moving away from the additive, right? So many of the additives, like the fire retardants, the insect repellents, the water repellents that you add to plastics or to, for example, fabrics, buyers that contain plastics are of concern. My colleagues at UNEP are very keen on making that very visible. And you need to transit both from the plastic products to non-plastic substitutes and the additives of concern to alternative additives. But you need to do so in a way that is responsible. Paper also pollutes, right? Ceramic making also uses a lot of energy. So how do we make paper with less pollution? How do we make ceramics using less energy? I think those questions need to be addressed as part of the solution to a responsible and regret-free material systems transition. I'll stop here. So I have more to present, but I love this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henrique. Wow. That was really, really interesting, and thank you so much for presenting it all so clearly. I'm quite jealous of your job. It looked like the stuff that you get to learn about in terms of like the trade, the science, you know, capturing CO2 from an incinerator chimney and turning it into plastic. It's like, what? Very, very cool stuff. And I love how you present it in such a way that, you know, we can look at the past and look at transitions that we've made to show that it is possible. You know, we're not asking for the moon on a stick. Yes, we will learn things on the way, and not everything will work as easily as we might hope it will. But by setting out these pathways and the blueprints and sharing experiences, we can certainly accelerate that change. So thank you so much for your presentation. Henrique, would you like to just also connect this, what you've been talking about, to the upcoming 4th of June event, the UNCTAD session on West African plastics governance, please?
An opening here for discussion with the colleagues from East Africa. I mean, we have right now a process to try to make plastics better in the world, like the ANC negotiations. It's very challenging. Countries have different economic interests, very understandable interests. The plastics is very rooted into the affordability of food, in the provision of water. So it's not easy. It's like separating a coin drawing twin. You really need to be careful. But what is a second best to the global agreement, and at the same time, what is the best supporting pillar to a global approach on plastics to make plastics better? Regionalism. So this experience to create the regulatory layer bottom up in East Africa and harmonize across the countries could become a template for West Africa, so where we are having an event to discuss this on the 4th of June, together with the forum, and it could become a template for ASEAN, for Mercosur, for other areas to take similar action. So I'm gonna put a few details here in the chat if you are interested in the event on the 4th of June, but we would really like to see that type of regional momentum, both on single-use plastic controls, material standards, because you have to know what you're buying, right? The consumers need to know what you're getting, if it's actually degradable or not degradable, the persistence in nature, and this can be done by having anchored, recognized standards that will also allow you to trade the product in different markets without causing consumer misinformation or pollution. And finally, substitution roadmaps. So it's a bit of a three-dimensional space that can also be worked regionally. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Henrique. And thank you to everybody. Thank you to all who have been putting your comments and questions in the chat. And thank you as well to Faith and others who have been responding to those questions while we've been going through the presentations. Once again, you know, we really, really encourage you to get involved in the chat here. We are going to be saving all of the comments, and, you know, all of this discussion is going to contribute to the final briefing notes and synthesis report that comes out of the, you know, the entire SMEP program. So please do engage here. We have Ebenezer has just arrived. Brilliant. Welcome, Ebenezer. Thank you so much for making it. Right, I am actually going to invite Ebenezer to say a few words. I'm also going to pop a few questions into the chat so that they might prompt some thoughts from people in the audience, and please do contribute your responses or other questions that you may have. Ebenezer, would you like to turn your camera on so we can see if we can see you?
Hi, Zoe.
Hi, great.
Hi, everyone.
I can hear you. Can I see you? Can't see you yet. Maybe you're just on a later screen. Sorry, bear with me one sec. Gotcha. Hi, Ebenezer.
Hi, Zoe.
Right, I wonder if Stacey, are you able to here I can add a spotlight there we go. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate that it's an incredibly busy morning for you. So just to catch you up, we delivered your excellent presentation earlier, so thank you very much for sharing that on the 6 aspects that you've been addressing in Ghana there. And I really liked your analogy of, if you've got a baby, you need to give it the supportive factors, the milk, the this, that, to help it grow and to nurture that. And then we heard from Faith and Carlotta about the East African Single-Use Plastics Bill, and Henrique just finished his presentation. Not sure if you saw that, but he was just tying it back to the work that's being done in West Africa, this event that's coming up on the 4th of June, looking at how to actually, develop these regional pathways. And his presentation was very positive and optimistic and can do, which was delightful. So I just, I'd like to hand the microphone to you, please, Ebenezer, and thanks once again for joining us. Is there anything that you feel you'd like to add on top of your initial presentation?
Yes, thank you very much, Zoe, and hello, colleagues. Apologies again for not being able to join at the start. I think obviously it sounds like it's been a robust conversation. The only thing I would like to add is that I think there's a real opportunity, to take all these learnings and to chart a path towards ensuring that plastic alternatives and material substitution actually really takes off. And also, I think there's the opportunity to, as I often say, to join the dots across different countries, particularly on the African continent, where we can sew all of these different experiences together. Because when you look at what is going on in East Africa, much of which has been shared by Faith and others, and you look at what's going on the West African side in Ghana, there is a synergy between the two. And I think that there are two different approaches that are, you can say from sort of the same family. So you can think of them as cousins, really. And if we bring those two approaches together, I think there's a huge promise in there to develop, a unique African approach to plastic substitution, which tackles things and brings the innovation and the policy, the regulatory, etc. aspects all together into one robust approach. So thank you again so very much. And yeah, it sounds like a brilliant conversation, and well done to all.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Ebenezer. And once again, really appreciate you joining us when you have such a busy schedule today. I think just listening to your points there and reflecting on what Henrique was talking about as well, I think it's important that we just pause for a minute and recognize, with global events the way that they are, and the price of oil suddenly being very unpredictable, let's say, I think that the need for this conversation is more pertinent than ever. When we talk a lot about resilience. Well, what is resilience when if the price of oil spikes and virgin plastic prices also spike with that? Is it going to make food packaging unaffordable as well as the transport of it? So I think it's really important and really key when we look at regional resilience, national resilience, that we try to explore ways that we can get away from being so dependent on these global supply chains that can suddenly leave us with lots of questions and very few answers, and potentially, a lot of hungry people, or, suddenly transport is unaffordable, and all these things. So thank you for bringing that in. Henrique has just added in the comments here about an article that he wrote recently, which examined the price inflation in plastics brought about by the Hormuz crisis, as well as the different barriers holding substitutes back. So do have a look at that in the comments, and once again, thank you to everyone who's been adding their thoughts into the comments section here. Like I said, we are going to be using all of this information to help compile the briefing notes at the end of the program. So please do continue to add your thoughts. I also added a few questions there just to get your mental juices flowing. So I guess perhaps now would be a nice time to bring back Faith, because we haven't heard from you for quite a while, Faith. And perhaps I could just ask you a specific question, which I have prepared. So from the legal and implementation side, what does the East African Community Single-Use Plastics Bill tell us about turning plastic policy ambition into something that can work across different countries? You talked a lot about the concerns around loss of sovereignty and all this kind of thing. So, could you tell us a little bit around this, please?
Yeah. Sure. So the ESC single-use plastic bill shows that, in my view, it shows that regional plastic policy is likely to work if it moves beyond broader ambition into a clear legal architecture, as we have. So for me, the main lesson is that you cannot simply say ban plastics or promote alternatives and expect implementation to follow. So across the ESC, partner steps have for example, have different legal system, enforcement capacities, manufacturing, etc. And therefore, a regional instrument, for example, like the ESC single-use plastic bill, it has to do three things in my view, quickly. So the first one, it has to create a common baseline so that businesses are not dealing with completely fragmented rules across the region. Second, it must leave enough room for domestication. So this is actually part of the legal system in this part of the world. And first implementation, if you talk about a 3-year period, then there are countries which will move within the first year, second year, etc. Because countries will transition they will not transition at the same speed. And third, it must connect the ban or the restriction to the broader systems. For example, standards for alternatives, EPR schemes, public procurement, labeling, enforcement power, penalties, and support for local industry. And I'll say those are the various aspects that have been covered in the bill.
Super, yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot. That's great. One other issue that's come through quite a lot in the comments that's obviously causing concern, or people still have a lot of questions around. We had a comment from David Wilson. We've got another one here similar from Berenice, which is when we look at substitutes, but perhaps this question is actually for Ebenezer, because it is focused more on bioplastics and how we bring these new materials to the market. And perhaps after you, Ebenezer, I'll pass to Henrique for his reflection on it. So at the moment, we have, yes, there are the problematic plastics like the single-use sachets and things like that actually can't be recycled. But we have other plastics, the more common ones, which are collected by the informal sector and go into standard recycling processes. Now, when we look to replace some plastics with bioplastics, or plastics that have been made not from fossil fuel derivatives, but from from plants that have been grown, how do collectors identify which is which? How do recyclers identify which is which, and stop the bioplastics coming into their standard recycling processes, because there they will act as as a contaminant? So I'm sure these are things that you've thought long and hard about, Ebenezer. So I won't go on any further, and I'll just pass the microphone to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Zoe, for that interesting question. I think this is something that we have discussed in relation to our work in Ghana, and our report, the policy blueprint report, is actually available on the SMEP website. So anyone who wants to go, take a deeper dive can have a look there. But we have a pillar within that blueprint that is focused entirely on standardization. And I think this is where standardization is critical. Obviously, standardization is important when you're talking about opening up export pathways. But I think obviously it's also important to ensure that the sorts of things that you have highlighted are prevented. So, for example, in Ghana, what we're doing is working, by good grace of God, with the government of Ghana in the implementation of the policy blueprint, and that involves the development of a standardization framework, which sets out a very, very detailed process to develop a comprehensive set of standards, which will set out the relevant details in terms of waste separation, waste management, etc. To ensure that there isn't that sort of confluence between obviously the plastic alternatives and the conventional single-use plastics that you've highlighted in your question. So I think that's the key thing that needs to be done going forward. And we've also got to bring stakeholders along as well as we do that. It is very, very important. The informal waste pickers as well, and the different waste management companies that exist. Ghana, like many other countries, has a very broad landscape when it comes to waste management actors. And we need to bring them together as well. So our plans when it comes to that side of the implementation of the blueprint is to bring everybody along as we go through that process of developing that comprehensive and robust standardization framework and set of standards.
Very helpful. Thanks, Ebenezer. I think I still have questions around it. I'm not saying it wasn't a strong answer, but so on the one side, we talk about, it would, for example, in discussions for the plastics treaty, there was a lot of talk around, we need to reduce the number of polymers that are on the market to make recycling easier. But then on the other hand, we're talking about the R&D, the bringing to market all of these wonderful, biodegradable, mainly plastic alternatives. So there does seem to be some kind of conflict there between the two ambitions. Maybe Henrique, I can see you nodding away there. Is this something that you've explored in your research in this space? Thanks again, Ebenezer. Thank you.
We got a good comment from David Wilson in the chat here, where he mentioned about this, for example, scaling bioplastics. By the way, I was not talking about bioplastics alone, but bioplastics especially are often promoted, at least to the consumer face, as a sustainable alternative. So something that will not pollute, right? Which is often not true. You need to have markings on products that say, okay, this degrades in an ambient temperature and can be commingled with organic waste, right? And there needs to be credibility that this marking is based on a standard that is recognized, ideally in a region or hopefully globally, because the products, the ketchup bottle, whatever, it's often traded, right? It's traded in different markets. So if it's produced in Kenya and it ends up going to Uganda, it's important to have a regional standard that ensures that whoever is buying this product knows the end-of-life performance of it. And as well for the businesses, right? For the recyclers who are expecting a bottle of, let's say, HDPE to recycle and sell again the polymer, so that they know that this bottle, perhaps due to a different color or different marking, is actually not suitable for recycling. It's made of a PHA or a biodegradable or composite, and can be commingled with the organic waste without major concerns. So these markings and standards are often missing in many countries, and there's a lot of confusion to consumers. There is also a framework about that, the United Nations Consumer Protection Guidelines, which establish what products need to communicate to end users in order to be responsibly put into the market.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, Carlotta, is there anything that you'd like to add at this point in, regarding your work on substitutes and any pushback that you've had to, the non-conventional plastics being, put onto markets?
The only things I would add is that what I think is essential, but is also not that common, is breaking the silos and start to work collaboratively. It's going to be is difficult, and I am familiar with the African market, not with others, and this is definitely one of the big problems. We need to break those silos. We need to collaborate. We need to make sure that every project connect the dot and make an impact in an holistic way. It doesn't mean that it's easy to do this, especially because in a situation where we are all facing a cut in funding or from all sides of the stakeholder, I think this will become more and more important. I've seen in the last 5 years projects were funded 3 times for the same thing. And this cannot be feasible anymore. So is making sure that there is an overarching strategy from the government, if not that the funds can be put on that, and then that everything develop accordingly. I know it's difficult, the market will not help, but if we want to really make an impact, it has to happen. And I think from our little experience and from a pro bono experience, because this has been ALN work so far, I think we have slowly managed to build an ecosystem and trying to connect this to make more impact. That's why very happy to connect with other countries in the west of Africa to share what we have done, because the bill is there, is available for everyone to be used. So that's my piece of experience from 5 years in East Africa with plastic.
Great, super. Thank you very much, Carlotta, and thank you to everybody who is continuing to add comments into the chat. This is great. So Anna mentioned that what about the ammonia and other synthetic fertilizers that make bio-based plastics not fossil free when it comes to scale? And I think probably if I can, on behalf of the speakers, just perhaps bring us back to this transition phase that we are in. Yes, ideally, in the end, we will be completely free of our dependence on fossil fuels, but it's certainly not going to happen overnight, is it? And I think this also ties in with, so thank you, Anna, for that comment. I think while we're looking at the wider connections here, Henrique, can I just bring you back to speak for a moment about water and biodiversity and the links between these trade policies and regional development as well? Thank you.
The comment from Anna was spot on, and I also just replied here. I come from the biofuels sciences, right? That's where my studies went, and one of the main topics was land use, right? So if you're going to produce fuels to tank your car, is that fair? Is that correct? Given the indirect effects on foods that could have been grown on that land. The same for materials, right? Are we going to make now packaging out of corn so that we will need more land to make corn and packaging for the corn? So those things are complicated. So and so is the input choice, right? So you are completely right that we do not want to shift one problem or one to another where we have regrets later. So we have been looking a lot at the oceans, like the underexploited frontier of materials, especially seaweeds, and almost 10 countries now are part of the UN Global Seaweed Initiative, and they're very interested. Some are producing actually bioplastics made of seaweed, like PHAs, and that could be one frontier where the production of seaweed will actually regenerate fish stocks, a thing that is very complicated to do, and produce biomass for, I'd say, a future large-scale material systems. But there was another comment by Lalisi, I believe. Yes, you cannot just shift, okay, now we make everything out of biodegradables, and then we are guilt-free, right? Remember the example I gave about the water future, right? We can redesign delivery, like reuse alternative way of delivering the function, like hydration. We don't need the bottle, we don't need the sachet. Another colleague mentioned the sachet here in Nigeria. We just need to have clean water getting to people. It can be from the future, and the future uses ceramics. Ceramics don't pollute much end of life. So why don't we have those futures? That's where we should work.
Great. Thank you. And once again, I really appreciate your positivity and optimism about this huge transition that we are undertaking at the moment, Henrique. So thank you. Right, so we have 5 minutes left until the end of our session. Thank you very much, Jana, for adding your comment here. Are there any resource documents that synthesize accessible and sustainable alternatives to plastic? I believe FreshPPact, Ebenezer, there's documentation from your project online now, isn't there?
Yes, Zoe, and I just posted a link to our report. So happy for anyone to go on there and obviously have access to that.
Super, thank you. And Lizzie and Nicole, thank you very much for your very valuable comments here, which are more about the consumption level. So, recognizing that at the end of the day, we are still using far too many resources. And as we found through the data analysis in the Global Waste Management Outlook, there isn't a country on earth that has managed yet to decouple economic growth from resource use and waste. So the more money we have, the more we buy, the more waste we generate. So Lizzie's comment here, if we allow the focus to fall on the fossil or bio question rather than the more challenging single-use aspect, are we not just continuing to facilitate guilt-free consumption? And Nicole added after as well that the question of consumption isn't being discussed beyond basic need products, of course. So, but I do think that Henrique's example that he shared of the water container that filters your water so that we can then reduce the amount of plastic packaging needed to get safe water to consumers. Inventions like this, they're not even that new. But we got away from them because of the convenience culture that's been really marketed very, very effectively at us all. And now this whole, the younger generations aren't even aware a lot of the time of these older, more traditional techniques that served us perfectly well for a long time before this pattern of using single-use plastic. So look, I feel like we could talk all day, and I would love to, but I'm conscious that our speakers and all of you, of course, have other things to get on with. So I'm going to ask the speakers one final question, which is, what is one practical message you'd like us to carry into the briefing note from today's discussion? So if there's one thing that we can, continue to share as part of the legacy of the SMEP program, what would it be? And I'm going to start with Faith, please. I'll go Faith, Carlotta, Ebenezer, Henrique. Thank you so much. So one message you'd like us to carry into the briefing note, Faith.
Sure. In my view, is that regional plastic regulation will ultimately succeed or fail, at the implementation stage, not at the policy announcement stage, as it were. So that means that the conversations must move beyond bans alone and focus equally on standards, transition pathways, financing, enforcement capacity, regional harmonization, etc. And also talking about funding, sorry, this is the last one. I think we need to fund the systems around substitution, not just the substitute themselves. So that means supporting standard bodies, regional harmonization, testing capacity, for example, EPR implementation, and regulatory coordination alongside product innovation, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Faith. Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you. Carlotta.
I think I'll incorporate what Faith said because I've taken up a bit previously on what I think is important. So I'll pass to Henrique.
Similarly, if we could join forces, like we did with ALN, with Flip Floppy in East Africa, to promote the spirits and the technicalities of regionalism, working with the parliament in other regions of the world. Like, for example, we're cooperating now with the World Economic Forum, with the NPAPs, and with UNIDO, and also a bit with Plastics Reboot from UNEP, to promote the idea of regionalism in West Africa. So I think this type of soft infrastructure will unlock investment decisions later on if it succeeds. So join forces. Let's raise flags together.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Henrique. And Ebenezer, then final word to you, please.
Yes, thank you, Zoe. So for me, the one thing is we've got to fix the incubator so that the baby can really take off. That's how I would put it. So the policy landscape needs to support liftoff. And I think if we get that right, there's the opportunity to get that right. And if we get that right, not just in places like Ghana and Kenya, but all across the continent, we won't just succeed in replacing single-use plastics, but we will reshape the future, literally, for the good of all people, for the good of the world, and we'll sort of be better for it. So yeah, thank you.
Wow, big-hearted contribution there. Thank you so much. I think that really helps in bringing us back down to why we're all here. We've had a fantastic and really informative session on how to, how to not just develop substitutes, but how to really help them to scale. Because that has been one of the challenges so far. And thank you so much to everybody who's added comments into the. It's been a very lively comment section, which has been brilliant, particularly bringing out those issues of resource consumption and reuse. And thank you, Henrique, for adding your report about how reuse often depends on water networks. So let's not try and look at this too simplistically, because it's never that simple. And I'm really pleased that we have so many brilliant minds working across diverse sectors. Like I said earlier, like what came out of Carlotta's presentation, there is always a lot of talk about the need for collaboration, but I think here we can really see that it's happening, and you are all shining a huge light on this issue and bringing so many great minds to it. So my admiration and thanks to you all, and much gratitude. Thank you again to all of our speakers, Faith, Carlotta, Ebenezer and Henrique. And thank you so much to everybody who's joined us today and across the whole series. This has been the third and final webinar in the SMEP Plastics End of Life series. The next step is to turn these discussions into briefing documents and a final synthesis report. So please, if you have more comments, connect with me on LinkedIn or any of our speakers, share your comments, and perhaps I can pop my my email into the chat now as well. And the team at SouthSouthNorth, Stacey and Alexa and Melanie, thank you all so much for your help. You have really made this seamless, and I'm very grateful. To everybody here, please do complete the feedback form. The link has just been shared in the chat, and any final comments, connect with us if you'd like to share your thoughts directly, because your feedback will help to make sure that these final outputs are useful, grounded and relevant beyond the webinars themselves. As Ebenezer just said, this is for the good of current and future generations. We have a lot of responsibility, and we also have a lot of opportunity, and once again, just to echo Henrique's optimism there and can-do attitude, because that's what it's going to take. We need to stay positive, we need to stay collaborating, as Faith and Carlotta have really beautifully demonstrated, and we need to keep these conversations going. So once again, please give us your comments. It's all going to contribute to something, to the legacy of this fantastic SMEP program. Huge congratulations to everybody that's been involved, and thank you so much for joining us. Hope to see you again. All right, take care then. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.